Hello, everyone. This is Jed at CharterFolk. CharterFolk is a new community we're building online for people who are super passionate about the charter school movement and want a new place to come together to explore the issues that are in front of our movement and to forge a new smart path forward. Among the things that we're doing, we are putting out publications, online newsletters twice a week. We are celebrating a different CharterFolk extraordinaire every Monday. And we're also doing a monthly videocast series, and we are delighted to be able to start our first one today with a great first guest, Arne Duncan. Arne is with us. Arne, thank you so much again for being here with us. As all guests know, Arne served as the Secretary of Education. Before that, you were the Chancellor Superintendent in Chicago. That's where you and I first met. If you might remember, I was going to business school at Kellogg, and we were thinking as business school students, how are there ways that we could help the large school district address its various business challenges? And you were incredibly gracious, and you invited me to come right on downtown. And I almost would have stayed and worked on that project together, but I had some folks that threw me into experiences that were going to be closer to kids. But I was really appreciative of the time we spent together, and have always remembered that as our starting point for a relationship together. So thank you for that, and thank you for being willing to be here today.
Happy to do it. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right, fantastic. Listen, I wanted to just start with a little bit of like Arne catch up. You've been doing a lot of things since you left as being Secretary of Ed. You and I have talked a little bit about these things. Some of these things I think are just really great things for our listeners to hear about. Would you mind talking a few minutes about what you're working on right now?
Sure. So my real job, my day job that we've been doing for almost 4 years now is just working really, really hard to try and reduce gun violence here in my home of Chicago. And this, stems from, starting to lose friends when I was a teenager. During that time at Chicago Public Schools, very, very tragically, on average, during my 7.5 years there, we lost a student every 2 weeks due to gun violence. It was a staggering, rate of loss. And my wife and I had 2 young kids there, and 99% of the time I was meeting, parents after they had just lost their son or daughter. And everything else that's supposed to be hard, whether it's academic achievement or budget or labor management stuff or operations, finances, whatever. I don't want to say any of that was easy, but that they were all way, way easier than meeting those families, going to those funerals, going to classrooms where there was an empty desk and trying to make sense of the senseless. And very naively, in hindsight, when our family moved to D.C. in 2009, I thought we were rock bottom. I thought it couldn't get any worse. And unfortunately, for a whole host of reasons, things got a lot worse. So we've been at it for almost 4 years now, working in the 15 neighborhoods here in Chicago that produce the vast majority of violence, working with the young men who are most likely to shoot or be shot, which here in Chicago is young black men ages 17 to 24. And we do a number of different things. We have an amazing street outreach team. We have a phenomenal clinical team to help our guys deal with often a lifetime of trauma. We have life coaches, often guys that have been in the streets, all their lives, been locked up for, unfortunately, sometimes long periods of time, but have come out and really want to help people learn from their life experiences. And we have an education component. We've had lots of guys get high school diplomas. We have a set starting college this fall, which is really exciting. And then we have a jobs piece where we transition guys from our work into the mainstream economy and try and give them a way to not they're going to make money. It's just our choice whether they're going to make it on the illegal side of the street or on the legal. And we have about 40 employers that are hiring our men at the back end of our programming. So that's my real job. That's what I'm obsessed about. We had 3 consecutive years of double-digit reductions. And my metrics, my scorecards is just pretty simple now. It's just homicides and shootings. That's it. We had 3 consecutive years of double-digit reductions. That was great. This year has been really, really, really hard, and we're up significantly as a city. It's a really tough time for a whole host of reasons we can talk about if you want. The one thing that's interesting, the neighborhood where we started, where we're the deepest, where we've worked the longest, while the city's up about 51%, we're actually down about 30% for the year. So a huge swing between those two, and having a real sense of the kind of work it takes to actually make communities safer and give men a chance to do something better. And there's, more recently been spending a lot of time, unfortunately, on sort of school reopenings, which I'm sure you'd probably rather talk about that a little bit, and just due to the absence of federal leadership. Lots of time talking to superintendents, doing a number of sort of TV appearances. To actually just got done, just testified before Congress, half an hour ago, and just trying to, step into a leadership void with others and try and give superintendents and principals some guidance about what's safe and what makes sense in these really, really difficult times.
Yeah, well, that's amazing work that you're focused on right now. I was on a similar video chat with John King real recently, and he told just this amazing story about his own personal background and what it was that allowed him to first click into this idea of education equity. You talked about having folks close to you that were affected by gun violence, but do you have that click in moment early in life? Hey, there's something about education. There's something about equity that is still compelling. It may become my life's calling.
Yeah, well, John and I are both, sort of, I guess, creatures of our environment, as so many folks are. So different stories, but ending up in sort of the same common path and passion. So both my parents were educators. I grew up in Hyde Park. My dad was a professor at the University of Chicago. We basically grew up on campus. I'm back home. We lived 2 blocks from where I grew up. Mm-hmm. And my mother ran an inner city after school tutoring program, and she started that before I was born in 64, and my sister in 67, and my brother in 70, and she started in 61. So we literally were raised as a part of her program from the time we were born. So I was going to an after-school program way before I went to a regular school, and it just had this unbelievably formative impact in all 3 of us. She did that work for 52 years until her health gave out. Unfortunately, she has Alzheimer's now, and it's been tough. But I've done what I've done. My sister's trained principals for Chicago Public Schools. My brother, as my mother's health started to fail, he actually helped run her program, for a while. And what we just saw all our lives was this tremendous just disparity in opportunity between our friends during the school day and our afternoon friends. And the crazy thing is, people talk about different zip codes. It's actually the same zip code. My mother's program was like 12 blocks from where we grew up. We would walk there some days. But in those days, there was an invisible border, 47th Street border between middle-class integrated Hyde Park and all black, all poor North Kenwood, Oakland. And her program was just on the other side of it. So what we just saw all our life was, kids who were as smart, as talented, as hardworking, as resilient, as creative, as entrepreneurial in the afternoons during the day, and just nowhere near the opportunities that our daytime friends had. My mother did, and her volunteers did just an amazing job of changing those odds. And some extraordinary success stories, which I'm happy to talk about if you want. But just, I always thought her program was at 46 in Greenwood, had 50, 60, 70 kids a day, whatever. And I just thought about the kids at 43rd in Greenwood, or 47th in Ellis, who just didn't happen to find her program, and just how much lost potential, just in our one little neighborhood. Then you think about the city, and then you think about the country. So that's the driving force for me, that knowing what's possible, knowing what kids can accomplish coming from, very tough families, very tough communities, total poverty. And also knowing what's at stake when we fail to educate, when that's not the pipeline to a better life, and seeing, frankly, the deadly consequences of that.
Well, interesting. I have a background that's somewhat similar in that both my mom and dad were educators. And all of my memories of dinner conversations and those kinds of things were discussion between my mom and dad about the challenges of public education. And I remember after I did my first month on the job as a teacher, driving home thinking to myself, hey, I made some pretty good decisions today in my first month on the job. Why is that? And I attributed that at that point, and I still do to this day, to having been around the dinner table with my parents from a very young age, just built the intuition on these kinds of issues.
Yeah, I'll tell you one more quick anecdote. And there's just so many crazy stories. But the young men we're working with, I had one of the first group of guys we worked with. He said, Arne, I wish I would have grown up with more toys, but we grew up with a household full of guns. And guess what? He became a shooter. And I just thought about, I grew up in a household full of books. Both my parents were educators, and surprise, surprise, all 3 of us kids became educators. And what I've really, really learned in this work is you just don't judge. And it doesn't make me any better, any smarter, any whatever. I just followed my family business. You followed your family business. He followed his family business. And you and I just happen to be born into families that it was a slightly different family business. So this work it's so complicated and so deep, but it does nothing if it doesn't humble you, and just to really see our common humanity, and see how much just the circumstances of birth, circumstances of community, circumstances of family shape us in ways. And had I been born in that family, would I have made different choices? I can't say I would have.
Yeah. Well, I've been saying that the year 2020 is a well-numbered year in that it's putting into focus. It's giving us 2020 vision on a lot of issues that we've been unable to see with clarity before. We've had, just the combination of COVID and then the response, since the death of George Floyd. I wonder, how are these experiences affecting your worldview? And also, how are they changing your thoughts about the work? What is being made plain to us about what we need to do now with an even greater sense of urgency?
Yeah, this is state the obvious. It's just been such a difficult time, and I've said repeatedly, I think we're dealing with a couple different public health crises, a couple different pandemics. One is obviously COVID. For us, there's this pandemic or public health crisis of gun violence, and the third one is the public health crisis of systemic racism. And that's not new this year or new in the past couple months, but is 400 years old. And I don't know if I say unfortunately, just the reality is we deal at the intersection of all three of those. We see the results of all three of those. So, social distancing is a new term. The neighborhoods that we work in have been socially distanced for decades. And you talk about redlining, you talk about lack of investment, you talk about lack of access to capital, lack of access to healthcare, food deserts, you name it. There's nothing new there. And in part because of that, I was trying to be honest, very candidly, this has probably been the hardest time of us doing this work, and one of the hardest times for me personally. In the past, post George Floyd, we have had a staff member shot and killed. We've had 3 of our young men shot and killed. We had the 20-month-old baby of one of our men riding in the car seat, going to laundromat with his mother, shot and killed. We had one of our star high school students. She's been so active in the anti-violence work just the past couple of years of us. Literally on the day of her virtual graduation, she went to the gas station to buy some water, shot through the arm, no police, no ambulance, almost bled out. Mother took her to the hospital. She survived. But we've dealt with a level of trauma and loss. We've had hard times before, but nothing like this. And I know the quote that the arc of justice, arc of time, whatever is long, but it bends towards justice. I hope that's true. I can't sit here and promise that that's true. Yeah. My only hope is that all these multiple crises, these multiple pandemics, these multiple public health crises are forcing us to face some very uncomfortable truths that are not new truths, but that we've been able to hide from, and we can't hide from them anymore. And the question is, do we have the courage, in lots of sectors, and we can talk about education, including education, to do some things very, very differently. And if we do that, then I am hopeful, I'm confident we can build a country that's more fair and more equitable and more just in every aspect. But there's no guarantee that we'll summon that courage. And again, to state the obvious, I think we've taken massive steps in the wrong direction the past 3 years, almost 4 years under President Trump. So this has been a really challenging time. I'll say very honestly, I've probably never felt more inadequate. And that as hard as we've all worked and as much as we've tried to do throughout our lives to really comprehend, here's where we are. Despite all of that, and how far we have to go, and how differently we have to work, and how much smarter and how much more collaboratively, and how much more uncomfortable we need to make ourselves to really try and get at this. There's an amazing obligation and opportunity. And again, I just really, really hope that collectively we can summon the courage to do what's right for our kids and for the community.
Do you think that, bringing it a little bit more specifically into education, there's been a lot of conversation about the inequities that are baked into so many different parts of our society. Certainly our policing practices, criminal justice in general. But what motivated me to do the work that I do was a feeling that those very same inequities are cooked into our public education system. It's been very hard to make those inequities visible. It's been very hard to motivate people to run at them with the gusto that I think is necessary. I think there are many charter folk who have recognized this, and this is what has motivated our work. But do you think that this broader discussion that's going on around our critical need to address injustice across our entire society actually opens up opportunities for us to make more progress in the education realm that we focus our work within?
Yes, I think the opportunity is absolutely there. Whether we take advantage of that opportunity is a very different question. And so, if we don't do it now, shame on us. And I don't, then you probably lose another 20, 30 years or something. But I just try and always be very honest. Sitting here today, I can't say that, with absolute certainty or a high level of confidence that we're going to have the courage to take on. And we can start to, if you want, we can sort of start to list those inequities. I'd have my list, you'd have your list. You'd probably have a lot of overlap, but they are deep, they are structural, they are embedded. And, just again, by definition to date, until right now, more than halfway through 2020, is a country we haven't done this stuff. There's been lots of amazing individual work of charters and others who have, really, found ways to have impact and to, change the calculus and change. I don't even like to say not beat the odds, change the odds. That's what it can't just be about beating the odds. But have we done it at true scale? Have we done it for, all the kids or all the communities that need it? And the truth is, real progress, amazing examples, but we're not close. We're not close to where we need to be.
Yep. And so if we think about, I've been trying to posit some new ideas about what would be an important contribution for charter schools going forward. My own sense on this is that our role is to take a public education system that unfortunately has turned out to be not that public, is riddled with the inequities I think that you're talking about. And we both model what schools look like that are more equitable, but then we push the entire system to purge itself of these inequities through the advocacy strength we're building and our care for kids and a variety of approaches. I wonder, just as a starting point, how do you react to something like that? Is that just not even? It's so broad and and undefined. It's hard to wrap our hands around it, or is it a good starting point for us to thinking about what the next generation of our work looks like?
Yeah, and you're living this every day in a way that I'm not. So these are just some initial thoughts. So three things maybe. One, yes, I think that's hugely important, that we have to lead by example. You have to demonstrate what's possible. You have to show that that's possible. Again, not just of one great principal or one great school or one great leader, but at some scale, and there's significant scale, amongst charter networks and the broader charter community. So I would say that's a starting point. But let me just sort of, not to give you more homework, probably last time you want me on your podcast, but I'm always good at assigning work. The other two things is just to continue to really try and influence the policy conversation. And, what percent of children now go to charter schools in the country? Do you know, ballpark? Is it
about 6%?
Yeah, I was gonna say 5. So yeah. So again, that's great. And again, not every charter is good. And I've challenged the charter community to hold the charters accountable and close down bad charters. So it's nothing about the name charter that matters. But I just think we can't be satisfied if we're serving 6% of children well, and a decent percent, whatever it might be, of the other 94% are not being served well. So one can, that's one, demonstrate what's possible, create those models, create those at scale. Second is to really continue to enter the public policy conversation in a really significant way. And, again, the good, the bad, and the ugly, but really put out there what's possible. And the third one that I've honestly pushed on in the past, and that we as a charters community have I think done honestly a really poor job, is to really have the voices of students and parents be heard, and the sort of the demand side of this thing. And you sort of think of how many parents, how many kids, how many children of color, how many parents of color, how many charter operators now who are educational leaders of color, and it's sub rosa. And I think that's really, really devastating from a political standpoint. And to really activate and motivate and empower and get out of the way. But that if we had more demand
Yeah.
for this, that changes everything. If you have a supply as great as it might be, as world beating as it might be, but that's not publicly known or acknowledged, or can be sort of pushed aside or whatever, because it's an inconvenient truth. And I think we've done we've done ourselves and frankly kids in the country. And I don't say this lightly. I mean this very sincerely. People can disagree. We've done the country a grave disservice by not really, really working with parents and students, leaders, but particularly educational leaders of color, to
Yeah.
tell their story and to tell it again, not PR, not spin. Tell it honestly, tell it clearly. And if we had a lot more parents demanding what the charter community is offering, we would be in a very different spot right now. And I think we just haven't invested in that for the past, 20, 25 years. It's not too late, but we paid a real price for not doing that.
Yeah. Well, I tend to think that some of these problems grow out of failure in creativity from people like me. I in one of the blogs, I referred to us as the schmuckheads responsible for advocacy in Charterland. My sense is that if we would change what we're advocating for, it's going to make it much easier to bring in the allies that you're talking about. But we have to be advocating for the right things. So I was really interested. You were like, you've got your laundry list of inequities. For example, for me, just Brown versus Board of Education. This T-shirt friend, gave to my son Quentin. It's the only, child T-shirt I couldn't get rid of. I framed it, right? We redline educational opportunity in this country. There is no way around this, right? And charter schools model that your place of residence should not determine where you go to school. In addition, by and large, there may be a few exceptions in some states, but generally, charter schools do not use selective admissions criteria as a basis for admissions. And yet we know that there are thousands of public schools across the state or country that do this. Given that we don't, and given that we're passionate on these issues, I think we should be pushing the entire public school system to purge itself of its redlining, attendance boundaries, in an orderly way, in a smart way, not erasing it altogether, but also pushing folks to get rid of these selective admissions criteria, which we know exclude kids by race. If we got together policy proposals like that, and then we asked more folks to be with us or taking the lead on it, I feel like they would be much more inclined to do it. But I don't know. React to that. Am I on the right track?
Yeah, no. I mean, unfortunately, there's so many. So yes, that's on the list. I mean, I'll just name a couple others on the list, and you can't. To your point, you got to focus. So you got to sort of prioritize all this stuff. So that's absolutely a battle or one battle that could have some rallying behind it. Two, obviously, just the disparities in how education is funded and the reliance on local property taxes and sales taxes. And again, COVID now, as hard as last school year was, this next school year is going to be harder as those local sales taxes, property taxes, everyone's going to be down. Districts are going to be hit. Charters are going to be hit probably even harder. And without a federal backstop, without a federal investment, this year is going to be brutal financially, and teachers laid off and all those things that we're not even having those conversations. But thinking about education as a national good rather than as a local whatever, that's another conversation. Then I always talk about a couple different ones. One is how we allocate time. Time is often the constant in public education. Charters have been more creative than most in terms of having time be the variable and trying to have learning be the constant. But we've seen very, very little innovation or change there. And again, now in this virtual world and how we learn, that should be different. Technology, clearly, another piece of that where kids, we know 80% of white kids and less than 2/3 of Black and Latino kids have devices, and have access to Wi-Fi. And that's got to be ubiquitous, like air, like water and electricity. And the fact that in this time of virtual learning being the reality for the vast majority of kids across the country, whether it's full-time or part-time or whatever, and the fact that we still have that massive inequity, and then the final one is talk about talent. That again, if we think teachers matter and principals matter, and charters have probably done this better than most, but I always I had my battles of what's federal and what's local, but I always said, 15,000 local districts. I traveled to all 50 states and, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of schools. I don't even know how many, but everywhere I went, I just asked, can you give me one district, one out of 15,000 that systematically identifies their hardest working, their most committed teachers and principals and put them in the kids in the community that need the most help. And there is not a single district. There's not one that does that. So you take yours, you take funding, you take time, you take technology, you take talent. I call them the 3 T's. There's, lots of ways to look at this thing. We're not, again, for all the great work, for all the, remarkable work, for all the blood, sweat, and tears, for all the remarkable work of kids, we're not even in the game. I mean, it's like we're not scratching the surface. And that's the question for me is, can we move much faster, much more radically in all of these areas, given this moment? And again, if we don't, then when the hell are we going to do it?
Yeah. Well, I totally agree with you on the funding equity piece. And it's each advocacy partner has to think about what is your entry point, right? One thing I think that charter schools have to offer is we budget ourselves down to the school level. People know what the money actually gets there, right? And once you can see things at a school level, it becomes much more meaningful to students and to parents, right? But massive school districts, you can't ever see it. And I know what the experience was at Hooper Avenue Elementary School, where I taught in South Central Los Angeles, when we were able to show our teachers how much funding would come back to our school if we went charter. It became real in that moment how much money was being taken away from our school in South Central Los Angeles. That should have been the best funded school anywhere in the country, right? But until it was brought down to the school level, right? So that's where I feel like we could be pushing. Hey, we already budget in this way, and we think that everybody else should. And not by formula. We want to see it down to the dollar, because we live in a country where money has been sucked away from the highest needs communities to subsidize the lowest needs communities, right? And when we are on the right side of history and on the right side of those issues, the parents, the community partners, the students that we want with us, I think are going to be there with far greater victory.
Yeah, I do think, so agree on all that. I just think this idea of real transparency and all this stuff and a scorecard and putting all this stuff out broadly for the public, and if others aren't willing to do that, people will figure it out. And just putting it out there, like I'll give obviously lots and lots of great charter networks, but what KIPP did about their college completion rates, I thought was, at least for me, that was the first time I'd ever seen that kind of data. And on one hand, it was better, probably much better than other districts. On the other hand, it wasn't as high as they wanted, but it was real. And it was the first time I've seen that scale, people really put that kind of stuff out. And then that's the benchmark. That's the launching pad. Then you hold yourself accountable every year for trying to get better at it. But that, whether it's financial transparency or transparency around outcomes, or all this different stuff, having the charter community just put that out by community, by charter network, by city, by whatever. Education has been so opaque for so long, and that's by design. Whether it's funding, whether it's 50 states having 50 different standards, you can't tell if a child's on track to be successful or not. Those things, that's not by accident. That's on purpose. And so, yes, modeling, leading by example. Again, not cheerleading, not spinning, putting out there. All this stuff is a work in progress. None of it's perfect. That vulnerability, transparency, honesty, vulnerability. That's what people are starving for that now. And so I think, again, for the charter community to lead by example and all of that stuff and just commit to it year after year after year and being relentless on it, that's a big deal.
Yeah. Well, taking it back a little bit into broader political dynamics, can you just offer some observations on where you think charter schools stand right now? We've gone through a period where there's been some very major blowback, and there's real concern about having lost some support in the Democratic Party. And would love to hear your thoughts about where we actually stand and what recommendations you have for us in terms of making ourselves as strong as possible for the future.
Yeah, so I'll say two things. I happen to be a Democrat, but for me, like, this election has nothing to do with Democrat or Republican or left or right. It's really fighting to save our country from a leader who is, a Russian asset, who is fundamentally corrupt. And it's everything's at stake. And my daughter's old enough to vote. It'll be her first time voting, and
Might as well.
I truly pray that this is the most consequential election of her lifetime. I hope there isn't another election this important. So for me, that fundamental issue of fighting to literally save our country, and things that I frankly took for granted and thought were here forever, I was seen just sort of not swept away, but fundamentally challenged in a couple years in ways that I didn't think were possible, and just how fragile our democracy is and how we have to fight for it every single day and continue to reinvent it. So for me, this election, so I'll get to education policy, but that's, I feel like I almost don't have the luxury of focusing on this. People ask me, this policy or that policy now, because the fight is so much bigger. And I think we have to unite to win that. And if we don't win it, then everything's out the window. And we got to count on, Russian interference. We got to count on being cheated. I always, use basketball analogies. It's like you're on the road and the refs are going to cheat you, and you can't win by 3 points because you're going to lose. You got to win by 15, so you win by 10. And that's the mentality we have to have. And whoever Vice President Biden picks for his vice president, we can't. We got to support that 100%. It doesn't. We all might have our personal opinions. It just doesn't matter. It's just so small. So that's the context. Yeah. Having said that, and it's a big if we do the hard work over the next 90 days to ensure that we have new leadership, and leadership that's has integrity, and leadership that isn't literally owned by a foreign power in charge, then at some point we can start to get into the nuances of education policy as we try and dig out of an economic crisis, as we try and dig out of a public health crisis. I'll go back to my original point. That's where I led with that. The best way I think to do that is through, again, not just the public policy advocacy, but having many more students, many more parents, many more community leaders, many more charter leaders of color driving and leading this effort going forward. And I think that voice is so powerful and so important, and has been, muted, has not been invested in, has not been, listened to. And that's been a strategic error for a long time, and is a more than ever strategic error now. So that for me, if we want to get to a better place, I think that's the best. It's not an easy thing to do. That's the best thing I can sit here today and say that we need to do that frankly we haven't done.
Yep. Well, I say in a lot of different contexts that in terms of charter school advocacy, the two things that we've got to get great at, one is what I call thunderbolt casting. You actually have to get good at the ballot box. You have to get good at comms. You have to get good at your legislative work. You have to get good at grassroots, right? Yeah. But the other thing that you have to do is you have to build your mountaintop from which to launch your thunderbolts, right? And that's having a base. And that's what makes charter schools unique. In terms of all the reform efforts that have come before us, we now have millions of kids who we are serving, who are connected to tens of millions of family members. Yeah. The question is, has our movement really invested in its base to build the kind of authentic structures of engagement and empowerment and shared decision-making that we really have to do, right? And I think we are open to criticism that we have not done that at nearly the level of seriousness that we should have.
Yeah, I mean, that's my honest opinion. And I've said it again, it's not just a critique of the charter community. I've pushed the philanthropic community really hard. And if you look over the past 20 years, maybe you guys know the numbers, how much have we invested in teacher programs? And that's hugely important, but it's not probably tens, it's probably hundreds of millions of dollars. And how many have we invested in great principals? And that's probably tens of millions of dollars, not hundreds of millions of dollars. How much have we invested in great charter networks? And that's a huge number. How much have we invested in grassroots parents? And we haven't. And I think that's just such an important, leg of the stool that's been overlooked and been undervalued and underappreciated, and that has absolutely hurt the movement. And so it's incumbent upon all, yes, the charter community to look inward, but the philanthropic community that's been very generous in lots of different ways, but just hasn't seen the value of this thing. And so that's again, it's never too late, but that has to change, I think, in a very significant way. And not that you want to not invest in those other pieces; those are all important. But it's got to be. We got to rethink the resource allocation between those different pillars.
Yeah. Well, the proof is in the is in the pudding, right? It's the proof is in where we put the money and what we really do. It's like the talk is cheap now, right? How are we going to act? Well, I think we have an opportunity to do some acting in some different ways. But I think what the COVID and the George Floyd situation does is it puts everything in perspective, and it raises the expectations. Hey, it's got to work this time. Or, the worry that we have and that you shared when you first started the call, I think is something that will become even more pervasive. Look, I really appreciate your time. Can I keep you for another 5 to 10 minutes here? I got 2 more questions for you.
Yeah, let's do 2 questions. I'll be good.
All right, very good. One thing it's again, we want to get things through the election and all these pieces. One thing that's just made charter schools different from the very beginning is that we were this place where folks from all different political walks of life could come together, right? And now we're in this time where it's so difficult for anybody to stand together, from different political parties. Do you think that that notion of charter schools being that unique space where folks from all different political perspectives can come together is still the right place for us to be? Or literally, we've just gotten to a different point where we have to think about this completely differently?
Well, yeah, that's a really hard question that I'll probably give you a pretty incoherent answer to, because I'm really struggling with it. So I've never thought of myself as political. Like I said, I happen to be a Democrat. As you know better than others, I probably got as much critique from the left as I did from the right, if not more. And I just think education generally, has to be the ultimate bipartisan issue. What's right or left, or Democrat, Republican about higher graduation rates and more kids going to college. This is nation building work. And I always say we can have lots of fierce and vigorous debate about the best way to accomplish those things. But what's killed me is we've never agreed on some national goals. And I would love to set some goals of leading the world in access to high quality pre-K. I'd love to set a goal around high school graduation rates getting to 90%. Love to set a goal around college going and leading the world in college completion. And the truth is, we're not in the top 10 internationally in any of these things. And then again, let's have lots of debate, lots of what works in Montana might be different than inner city Chicago, might be different than wherever LA. But let's set some goals in a bipartisan way that are nation building goals that are, I would say a great military is our best defense, but a great educational system is our best offense. And then let's work on those goals. I will never, hopefully, give up on working in a bipartisan way on anything, whether it's on education, whether it's on trying to beat down a pandemic. I'm a big fan of national service. Like, how do we knit together and how do we rebuild trust? And I'd love to see a huge national service program so young people can start to see their common humanity when, before they become adults, and we all sort of, retreat to our neighborhoods and our social media feeds. So it's a long answer that we have to keep trying. We are also, we are in unprecedented times, unprecedented waters, and it may not be possible, but I think you always got to give it your best faith effort, a good faith effort. And I just, again, I think, again, this is my personal opinion. Folks on the call might disagree. I just, Trump didn't destroy the Republican Party. I think he's just the latest manifestation of where the Republican Party has been going for a long time. I think we need 2 good parties in this country. I don't think we need one, no one party has a monopoly on good ideas in anything, particularly education. The question is, if Trump can be defeated, if there is a significant, backlash against those in Congress, House and Senate who have backed him, is there a chance for the Republican Party to rebuild itself from the ashes? And I don't know whether that's possible or not. And, that would be an opportunity, hopefully to work with whatever the new Republican Party might be, because it's been destroyed. I can't tell you what it stands for now. And can we also, as we talked about, move some Democrats along on this issue? So it's a really hard one. Got to try, but I don't know. History teaches us some things, but this is a historic time in and of itself, and where we land on the flip side of this remains to be seen. Yeah.
All right, last question. So my wife is a clinical psychologist. This question of resiliency is coming up with so many of her clients right now. How to make it through just times that are more difficult than they could have possibly imagined. I think that's something that for all of us that care about education right now, the challenges are just so immense. I'm reading Howard Fuller's No Struggle, No Progress, right? And it just feels like the degree of struggle, that we have to build resiliency muscles for in order to generate that progress is something else. Can you just talk about your personal resiliency? Maybe where do you find it? And those around you, those that are pushing through, what is it that gives them the octane to act with as much vigor as the moment requires right now?
Yeah, no, that's a good place to end. And again, try and be very honest that this has been an extraordinarily difficult time, and I've probably had more sleepless nights or more restless nights than I've had in a long time. It's interesting in DC, as weighty as those issues are, they're policy issues and the challenges. What I've been dealing with now is the amount of loss, the level of trauma. What I see. It affects you. It affects you. And we're all trying to take care of ourselves and check on each other. But it's not one. This has not been a time that I've breezed through personally by any stretch. And again, I think I said at the start that for all that I've tried to do throughout my life, a real realization of how much I haven't done and how much further we have to go. So it's been hard. Having said that, I am always hopeful, and I'm always optimistic, and I'll just and I was trying to get very realistic. So it's not like hoping the unseen. I just happen to be able to work with lots and lots of young people on the South and West Side of Chicago who are living daily with a level of fear and trauma that I will never know. On my worst day, I won't know. And seeing their hope, seeing their dreams, seeing what they want to accomplish, that's a huge motivation for me. With young men that we work with, and transformation is not overnight, it's not linear. We have good days, we have heartbreaking days, but we literally have men who have not just shot at each other in the past, but have shot at each other and hit each other, who have found peace, who are now working together to build safer communities. I think about what that takes to have people who have tried to take your life, who have frankly taken the lives of people you were close to, for them to be able to put down those guns and build a bond around common humanity. I've never seen something like that before in my life. It's the most inspirational, motivating, just inspiring thing just to witness this. And some of the stuff we help foster and some of the stuff has happened and guys figured out themselves, and we just sort of hear about it after the fact, and it just sort of blows you away. Anyway, I got a million anecdotes, but guys on a trip to DC, unbeknownst to us, had shot at each other, and the guy who had been wounded, he went and made peace with the guy who had shot him and forgave him. And I just think, would I be able to do that if that had been me or been my kid or been my sister, brother, whatever? So for all the darkness, for all the personal struggle that's real, I still remain unbelievably hopeful, incredibly hopeful about what we can do, because I see what's possible. I see what's possible every day in the midst of a dark time, and that's what keeps me going.
Yeah. Well, it's an answer I hear from lots of folks. There's some people whose connection to the work is just so visceral that the energy they get from the families and the kids is itself the motivation that helps them. And I think, Arne, you've just been one of these remarkable people through your entire career. You've modeled that for us all. And you bring just a humanness to what you do that I think we all find just so compelling. So thank you for spending the time with us now. Thank you for speaking so candidly about your thoughts right now, and just really appreciate what you're doing on all fronts, political, still instructional with the young men you're working with now, and look forward to staying in contact with you.
Yeah, thanks for all your leadership, and one of these days we'll catch up in a physical manner. we're all getting tired of the Zoom stuff, but it's great to connect, and thanks for leadership, and thanks for a really thoughtful conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Arne.
Thanks.
Bye-bye now.